Crossovers. When characters from two different series or IPs or worlds meet. I think it all started with the Flintstones meet the Jetsons, and then Bart Simpson met the Critic. My name is Scott Neitlich. I was a brand manager, or I am a brand manager in the toy industry. I still work in the toy industry. I'm also a collector, which has given me a unique perspective, and I want to talk about toy crossovers. So we're used to things like comic book crossovers and cartoon crossovers, right? Where, two different characters meet up and do battle or, have witty banter back and forth. That tends to be, the traditional crossover, right? And usually it's either two different characters owned by the same company, like the Flintstones versus the Jetsons, or in this case, the first time Marvel and DC crossed over, where Superman beat up Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man beat up Superman, which doesn't seem like a fair fight to me, but I guess they gave Spider-Man bigger powers in this issue. So I want to talk about what it's like when toys cross over. And toy crossovers are a little bit different than, cartoons and comic books and movies, because we're dealing with, articulated action figures, not a storyline, not, an ongoing comic book or movie. So we have here a Black Series Greedo figure. Now, this is an action figure. Now, this here is a Greedo Pez dispenser. And in some ways, this can be considered a crossover because there are people who collect Pez dispensers and there's people who collect Star Wars. So by combining the form factor of Pez with the character of Greedo from Star Wars, this is kind of the first type of crossover. Continuing this kind of thought and how to sort of think about toy crossovers, things like, Little People, again, an established form factor, but now with DC characters. So in a way, this is kind of a crossover as well, by taking, a toy line and doing it with licensed characters. But I think when most people think of a crossover with toys, they're really thinking of more something like this. Similar to Flintstones meet the Jetsons, here you have DC Comics meets Masters of the Universe. So two different IPs offered together in the same package. Now, why do companies do this? Why do they put things out like this? This was a toy I put out, so I can definitely offer some insight on that. And obviously, when something like this happens, usually it's the toy company has access to both IPs. So in this case, Mattel had the master rights to DC and the rights to Masters of the Universe toys. Or for a version from across the aisle or across the toy company landscape to the boys in Pawtucket with Hasbro, this was an X-Men versus Street Fighter combo. So again, you had two different IPs. Now granted, this was based on an existing video game, or sort of a more modern version that they just did. Same thing, Capcom versus Marvel. But again, this is coming directly from an existing crossover IP, like the video game where they were crossing over, as opposed to that Zodak versus Green Lantern that only existed as a toy. And of course, who can't forget the amazing Legolas versus Obi-Wan Kenobi not just kidding, this is an example of someone swapping out toys in package. You can see a video more about that here. This is a naughty, naughty thing. Don't do this. All right, so what about other crossovers? So, movies that have crossovers like this, you have Alien versus Predator. Aliens and Predators being in the same line, of course, that makes sense because they were in the same movie together. But even before that came out, NECA was putting out Alien versus Predator action figures just as a kind of fun thing before even the movie happened. Granted, they'd met in the comic books, but this was taking two different IPs and merging them together, again, similar to that Zodak Green Lantern pack that we looked at earlier. Or what about this example? A Mortal Kombat figure of Spawn. Is this a crossover? Well, again, Spawn, appeared in the game, so it's more like him making a guest appearance versus the previous example we showed of the Little People, where you have an existing property of Little People and now doing licensed version of them in the Little People form factor. So this is one type of crossover that happens in toys, but it's not the only one. There's some interesting ones. So let's look at Star Wars Hot Wheels. So here we have a Star Wars spaceship offered in the Hot Wheels branding. Hot Wheels really known for doing cars. Occasionally they do blimps and planes, but not really spaceships. So it's an interesting crossover that you have a brand that makes racing cars doing spaceships. Or what about this other version of Hot Wheels Star Wars, where it is a Hot Wheels interpretation of a character, what they call character cars. I actually worked on this line. It was one of the last things I did at Mattel before I left. So another interesting crossover. Or here's Darth Mater. So here you have cars plus Hot Wheels. I guess now that Disney owns everything, they can do whatever they want with their IP, but an interesting blending of two IPs. Keeping along that Star Wars path, and we'll be off Star Wars in a moment, so here are the Star Wars Barbies. So this isn't Princess Leia, this is Barbie dressed up as different Star Wars characters, or at least fashion based on those. And here, you're appealing to either Barbie fans, well, not Barbie fans or Star Wars fans, you're appealing to fans of both. Again, like this example, Mickey dressed up as Luke Skywalker, or the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers as Ewoks. So you're appealing to fans of Disney and fans of Star Wars. And yes, I know that Disney now owns Star Wars, but what I'm trying to get at is it's kind of like a big Venn diagram. You have one brand and you have another brand. And when you do crossovers like this, the audience shrinks. It's much smaller because you're dealing with fans that are fans of both. To get those Barbie Star Wars, you have to be a Barbie collector and a Star Wars collector. If you're only a fan of one, the likelihood of buying Barbie Star Wars is slim. So you're appealing to a smaller market. All right, so let's look at some other examples of toy crossovers. And this is kind of my favorite category. When you take two different IPs and just smash them together. So things like Ninja Turtles, who have been Star Trek characters, and they've been Ghostbuster characters. This is taking one IP and literally dressing it up as characters from another. It's different from that Barbie example. That wasn't Barbie as R2-D2, that was Barbie as wearing a dress that was influenced by R2-D2. But this is literally Leonardo dressed up as a Ghostbuster. Or in this case, here's the Ninja Turtles dressed up as WWE characters, like specifically Macho Man or the Undertaker, like they're specific wrestlers here. And continuing along that wrestling theme, here's WWE wrestlers dressed up as He-Man characters. So, there again, there's Macho Man for a second time. Now he's not a Ninja Turtle dressed up as him, but this time it's the Macho Man dressed up as a Motu character. Or again, here you have WWE characters dressed up as Ghostbusters. Boy, this Ghostbusters in WWE, and they seem to be with every brand. But it's cool. Another interesting example, so this is the Star Wars Transformers line that came out kind of about the time of episode 2 and 3. So here you have a tiny little Han and Chewie that drive a spaceship that transforms into robots of themselves. Hey, why not? And an interesting crossover of two brands. So you have Star Wars and you have Transformers, and you're smashing them together. So, General Grievous as a robot or a character can turn into his wheel bike. But he also drives his wheel bike because it comes with a little General Grievous that goes inside of that. So it's very meta. Continuing along that theme, something that Hasbro recently started doing was these Transformers and movie properties like Ghostbusters, and they also do Back to the Future, and I think they just did a Top Gun Maverick, where you're taking the iconic vehicle from a line, DeLorean, Ecto-1, and transforming it into a robot based on that property. So now your Venn diagram is getting really overlapping. So, you're getting 80s fans, and you got to get fans of Ghostbusters and fans of Transformers and fans of robots. It's crazy, but at the end of the day, you're getting to a smaller and smaller audience within this Venn diagram because you have to be fans now of multiple things as opposed to just being a fan of Transformers or just being a fan of Ghostbusters. And it's going to be a much smaller audience that's going to be interested in buying this product. Perfect example, you've got your My Little Pony Dungeons & Dragons that Hasbro just offered at not Comic-Con 2020. So here you have to be a fan of Dungeons & Dragons and a fan of My Little Pony. And when you're weighing those, it's kind of finding that equal fan who loves both properties. Because if you just love My Little Pony or just love Dungeons & Dragons, the chance of buying that set might be a lot slimmer versus that perfect fan who buys both. Now, at the end of the day, why would a company make items that might have a more limiting fan base? Well, it's a big reason. It's kitsch. It's neat, it's different, it's fun. At the end of the day, while the audience might be a lot smaller when you're combining things, what you're creating is kitsch. You're creating zany, wacky, nostalgic objects that are fun. And at the end of the day, that's what toys are all about, is being fun. So even though it's a much smaller audience, while the audience size is smaller, I think the fun factor goes way up. And that can be why you wind up with Ninja Turtles dressed up as the crew of the Enterprise. Because this is wacky, it's kitsch, it's fun. Or, the Green Lantern versus Zodak. They never actually fought. Well, I think eventually there was a DC versus Motu comic book, but at the time they didn't. But it was fun to put them in a package together. It highlighted how both characters have similar themes. In that case, cosmic sort of warriors, space warriors. You're maximizing the fun of toys. Toys are meant to be fun. As adult collectors, yeah, we line them up on our shelf and we feel a sense of completion and accomplishment by getting everything. But when you have a mashup, it's just in the name of enjoyment. You're going to get a much smaller audience, but you might get some PR, and you're going to get something wacky and weird. And wacky and weird is cool, because that's what toys are all about. Toys are not supposed to be high-end statues or, perfect representations. They're supposed to be fun. And I think that Crossovers really maximizes this aspect and reminds us of what toys are all about. They're meant to be kitschy, they're meant to be fun, they're meant to be collectible, and at the end of the day, if it brings a smile, it's done its job. And that's really when a toy accomplishes its goal, because toys are supposed to be fun. If you like this video, if you have any other questions, if there's things I didn't cover about crossover toys, let me know in the comments. I could always do a follow-up. And I would most appreciate a subscription and a like and a bell and everything YouTube wants me to say. But I do like the subscriptions, thank you. I like to reach as many people. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys on the internet and in the toy aisle.